Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez. Thank you so much for listening on the radio today, Monday, the 23rd of October. If that's when you're listening on the radio, don't call us because there's nobody here to answer the phones or to answer your question. But if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube on Thursday, the 19th, between 4 and 5 p.m. Pacific time, that's when we're recording this episode. So you can call us with your questions using the number there, right there on the bottom of my chinny chin chin. So give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. And answering your questions today, we've got Bobby Conway from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, joining us via the Bobby Cam. You know, Bobby, we're already wondering when you're going to come out here next to Southern California. When will we see you again, sir?
I will be in studio on Tuesday.
Wait, like tomorrow Tuesday? Quote unquote tomorrow Tuesday?
Yeah.
You always seem to sneak up on me.
I'm actually in California right now. I just landed a couple hours ago on Monday.
Oh, very cool. Great.
Right? Speaking of what we talked about last week, I mean, what kind of theory of time are we dealing with? An A theory, a B theory?
Yes.
How does all this fit together?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it when it comes to 2-hour Thursday on a Monday.
Flight out here.
Yes,
after you're already here.
Yeah, we can pray in faith, huh?
Thanks for asking.
Bobby will land safely, and yeah, exactly.
That flight was great.
Richard Semino is here in the studio with me. He's sitting in for Brian Broderson, and he's one of the senior pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And Richard had a great message yesterday, Sunday, at Calvary Costa Mesa, sitting in for Pastor Brian. It was wonderful, Richard.
Well, thank you.
Yes. And on Skype, we've got Richard Semino. No, we have Phil Metzger. We have Richard here in the studio. Phil Metzger from Calvary San Diego is on Skype. How are you, Phil?
I'm great. It's good to see you guys. I miss all y'all.
When are you coming up from San Diego?
Good to see you, bro.
Well, it's not tomorrow.
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yes. We missed him.
I'm hoping maybe next week. Hopefully next week I'm going to get up there.
Very cool. That'll be great to see you. All right. So as you know, on Monday, the program isn't live. So don't call us with your questions today, Monday. But if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I'm all mixed up today. Facebook or YouTube on Thursday. Give us a call. The number's right there on the bottom of your screen. Let's begin in San Bernardino, California. Here is Aaron. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Aaron.
Hello, guys.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I just wanted to say Albert Einstein said time is relative, so it doesn't really matter. But we don't know anything for sure. Because, my question, it just is kind of a spontaneous question that I was thinking about. And I just want to know when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, and I would imagine there was like a kind of a rush to get out of the city, and Lot and his children went to Zoar. And then they decided to get their dad drunk because they thought nobody was on the earth anymore because of the destruction. I'm wondering, where did they get the wine from?
Phil Metzger, what do you know?
Well, there were people still on the planet, and they most likely, when they left where they were, remember, cities were not everybody lived in cities. Most people lived, they were nomadic. And so there was plenty of places for them to, as they were getting out of Dodge, so to speak, there was plenty of opportunities for them to trade with other groups, other people. They isolated themselves a bit, but there was, let's just be real. Human nature, they always find a way to find some good alcohol. Everybody finds a way. So they found a way. There was people out there. There's traders, nomads, Bedouins, we might say today. There's people out around that don't live in cities, probably saw all that happened and used it as a great opportunity. So, hey, I've got an extra tunic. Would you trade that for some, wine or whatnot? And so that's probably what happened.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those questions we don't have information on, but I think what Phil's talking about seems to be a reasonable thought on it. And also, I mean, like in the question it says, and enough wine to get their father drunk.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it didn't take a lot to get Lot drunk. We don't know. Maybe he didn't have a high tolerance for alcohol. We don't know. But it's an interesting question, just one that we just haven't got a ton of information other than the fact that we do know things about the ancient Near East and their cultures. And Phil touched on those pretty well.
Yeah, Bobby Conway.
Yeah, and we see precedent for wine in place already, because when Noah got off the ark, he planted a vineyard, and in fact, he got inebriated after he got off the ark. And you think, my goodness, you just saw, civilization wiped out because of, this kind of behavior. And then he gets inebriated, and you think, man, how does that happen? I go, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't take a lot for me to imagine. If I just saw all of humanity wiped out except my, my inner tribe, I could see, doing a little imbibing myself, So not to say that makes it right, but I'm just kind of not throw a stone at Noah. I say I get it, and so obviously there was wine there, and you sit there and you go, man, that's really when everything was destroyed, and then he had the opportunity to still build a vineyard. So, like as Phil said, everybody, nor every civilization wasn't destroyed. It was just Sodom and Gomorrah. So obviously there would have been wineries in the surrounding area.
Phil Metzger?
I wonder too, Bobby. I'd be curious to wonder, how different was the world after the flood? And what was alcohol pre-flood? What was alcohol's potency post-flood? Was there a change? Yeah. Did somebody think, I can handle this, and then you find out the world changed after that flood? And I'm completely imagining something, right? But
totally.
But for the fun of it, you just wonder, what was that like? Yeah, it's crazy.
Aaron, thank you for calling us with your question today on Pastor's Perspective. Malachi, you're next. But first, since Aaron also brought up the question about time that we were discussing on the first half of Thursday's program, maybe we can continue on that for just a few minutes, since we were rushed. We ran out of time, literally, and couldn't completely answer that question. But Bobby was talking about the different theories of time, and Aaron right now mentioned that Albert Einstein's quote that time is relative. How does that play into what you were discussing on Thursday's first hour, Bobby?
Well, the whole theory of time, as it relates to, so for example, you have Newtonian physics, and then Einstein comes along with this theory of special relativity, and these great scientists, what they were doing, and what's interesting is during the time of Newton, that looked like that was fixed. And then Einstein comes along, and you just continue to see some of the different developments in the scientific world. As it relates to time being relative, if you ever watch Inception, that movie blew me away. That's the hardest I ever remember laughing in the last 20 years of my life. And it's the scene where you have McConaughey in the room at the end, and you have the present McConaughey in the room, and then the future McConaughey trying to get his attention behind the books. And I'm laughing at the absurdity of basically trying to show two McConaugheys, as if time would create a present McConaughey and a future McConaughey, where a future McConaughey could get the attention of the present McConaughey. And so that's why so my son was looking at me, he goes, "What's so funny?" I'm like, just the absurdity that you see here of, Christopher Nolan, and what he's trying to pull off there. And so it's a bit of a mind screw when you start thinking about this. So when it comes to time, you might have this idea that God is eternal, yet he's outside of time. So before God creates time, he's obviously eternal. And then when he creates time, if you're not going to go with an A theory time, you're going to say that he's still outside of time. And that's a lot of the ways that we learn about it in our theology class, right? When seminary. But an A theory of time would say that when God creates, what happens is, and again, like a lot of people today won't hold to this a theory of time. But when God creates as an eternal God, then he enters into time. And so then some would say, well, then does that mean that God can change? Because God says, I change not. And we know that God in his essential nature doesn't change, but he relates to us in a different tensed fashion. So for example, when I began answering this question, that was out in the future. And so God could relate to me from a future tense. But now that I'm answering the question, God could relate to me in the present tense. So there's a change in relations by which God relates to me from when I began answering the question. It was from a future perspective, which now God is hearing me speak in a present sense. And now that I've been talking about it for a while, so God's relationship to this conversation has one of tense truths. And there is a past tense, a present tense, and a future tense. Now, this is not open theism that God doesn't know the future. God does know the future. But how he relates through time is, if God is in time, he relates in this moment to me in the present tense, which would be different from the way that he relates as he thinks about this as a past tense versus what I'm about to say, which is this, that I'm going to say, that he relates to this in a future tense. And so it's very problematic, and I don't know very much about this stuff. I mean, it makes me scratch my head. I find myself, like I say, laughing when I do it, but I'd say if for anybody interested, they could go and study A Theory of Time, go to Reasonable Faith. William Lane Craig's done a lot of stuff on this. He's written 3 books on the concept of time. But frankly, for me, it's not, as our caller did say, I mean, I don't want to really waste my time trying to figure out time because I'm going to lose time. But there's things like with relativity. Think about aging, for example. Why is it that time seems like it goes by faster? So we experience a real 365-day year differently, right, relative to our age. So when I'm 4 years old, to become 5, that 1 year is 20% of my experience. So no wonder it takes forever for Christmas to come around the next year when you're a little kid, when you're 4, waiting for Christmas to come when you're 5, because that's 20% of your life. But when you're 19, waiting for a year to come around, that's 5% of your life. When you're 50, waiting for a year, that's 2% of your life. When you're 99, waiting for a year, that's 1% of your life. So you can see how that relativity of time, based on your experience of it, seemingly goes quicker. And so it really does twist the mind.
Richard?
I hope that answers it.
It does. That's all I can say. It does twist the mind. And I can tell you as the elder in the crowd today that time does seem to go much more quickly these days.
Phil Metzger, any thoughts from you?
Oh, no, my mind is blown. Nope, I'm good.
All right. If you're listening to the program today on Monday, which we recorded on Thursday, see, here we go, talking about the theory of time again. So let's just go right back to the phones here. Here's Malachi calling in from Corona, California. Hi there, Malachi.
Hello, pastors. Thank you for taking my question. Good to speak to you guys again. This is irrelevant to my question, but I just heard a little bit of the message earlier about Israel, and I just wanted to say that's really sad what's going on right now.
Oh, for sure.
Like, I think I overheard they're burning people alive, or?
Yeah, beheading babies. It's a crazy situation. It's been in the news for, it was like 2 weeks ago almost. Well, depending on when you're listening to this program. But for you, Malachi, almost 2 weeks ago. You can go to allisrael.com to read up on the latest of what's going on over there. So how can we help you today? You had a question about fasting, it says here.
Yeah, I actually did.
I just wanted you guys' insight on fasting and prayer. I know it's in the Bible, and I have done it occasionally, and I try not to let people know, but when I do, like my close family, I let them know that I am, and every time I say it, it's like, it seems foreign. Like, is that not a practice that is still done to this day, or is that part of the Old Testament?
It seems foreign to other Christians you talk to about, or just people in general?
People in general.
Okay. Richard, what's the deal with fasting?
Well, I would start with this, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion when I saw the question come up. Fasting is not the way that we twist the arm of God. I think there's a very real aspect in which fasting is helpful in bringing all of our attention to the things that God is doing in our lives, is speaking to us in our lives, the things that are happening in the world around us, and how we can best pray about those things. But we never want to view it as, well, fasting is just that extra little push that I need to get God to really step in this situation. So that's the starting point for it that I have. I want to hear what Bobby and Phil have to say on this, and on a couple of things that it's interesting. Char says a few things on this that are really quite interesting.
Okay. Phil, we'll start with you. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, Richard, about what you said there, that, fasting is not twisting God's arm. We remember in 2 Samuel 12, when David was fasting for the life of his child, but in this case, God had already willed something, and so his fasting wasn't going to accomplish that. So we're not twisting God's arm. Yeah, Matthew 6 talks about, Jesus speaks about, when you fast, don't make sure everybody can see that you're fasting. I think in some ways we could take that to an extreme level where we're afraid to tell anyone, and that's not what is meant here. But the idea is just like, if I walk up to Bobby and Bobby's like, completely looking exhausted and completely worn down, and, and I say, what's going on? He's like, oh man, I've just been fasting, and it's like that it's that super spiritual, but you really are just taking attention away from the purpose of fasting. And I'm using Bobby as a friend, as an example, guys. He's not doing that, but you understand that, like, it's when I'm trying to get attention for a spiritual act that is meant to be between me and God. It's where when I choose to fast, I'm saying, Lord, I'm going to deny my flesh. I'm going to take seriously when Jesus taught me to pray that I'm not going to live by bread alone. I'm going to give time. I'm going to give energy. I'm going to give mental and physical space to saying, God, I'm going to dedicate myself to you and to seeking you. We see in Matthew 17, Jesus was talking about the need for fasting and prayer, that there's spiritual power that comes through fasting. There was a person who was demon possessed, and the disciples were helpless to accomplish anything. And when Jesus came to them, he said, this kind can only come out through prayer and fasting. Now, let me tell you what that does not mean. That doesn't mean I go skip a meal and now I'm powerful. What it means is I should make prayer and fasting a regular part of my life. I'm not telling you what regular means, by the way. Neither does the Bible. It doesn't say once a week, once a month, or whatever. But just that I would give time in my life on a regular basis to skipping food, to seeking God, to prayer. And when I do that, Jesus says there's a power that I can experience with him that is available through fasting. So I know there's a lot more that could be said about that, but to one final thought, it's definitely still for today. Just because people see it as foreign doesn't mean that it should be. It is definitely something that we should still practice as a part of our Christian life today.
Bobby Conway?
Yeah, good stuff, guys. Fasting is definitely something that can be a very good opportunity to lean into the Lord. You don't always have to fast food. It can be fasting social media. It can be fasting just things in your life that you might want to turn down the volume on. It could be just setting aside that extra time to go deeper with the Lord. To really listen to him, to experience some hopeful pruning in our life. I know in my own life that I've experienced the power of God more on extended fasts than any time in my life. And, I've shared that when I was about 25, I did a 40-day fast. And I talked about how seeking the Lord during that fast, how God brought an actual revival to my college campus. And it's still talked about to this day. In fact, I got a call from the school about 5 years ago asking if I would, write my thoughts on it. On day 39 of the fast in chapel, the Spirit of God showed up and people just spontaneously started going forward, calling out to the Lord. Classes got canceled. It went on into the night. This was back when you had a payphone. You had a line of people standing in line just to call their relatives to witness to them. You would be in the chapel, people would be coming in. My uncle just got saved or whatever. I mean, then the state of Arkansas, people started calling our students to go out, and we started showing up, and the same kind of thing was happening. We just show up, and the power of God, you couldn't even get through a message. People were just so stirred and so moved. I remember on day 40 of the fast, it was probably about 11 o'clock at night, and my professor was talking about the cost of revival, and he asked me to come forward and pray. And I've never seen anything like this in a manifestation kind of a way. But when I stood up to go and pray, the entire student body, just like a powerful wind, blew through the room, and people were on their knees and they were crying out with travails that I've never heard in my life, wailing and weeping. Students were going up to their dorm rooms. They were bringing things down and just throwing stuff away, repenting of stuff. It was powerful. And I had 60 students. I was going out to the college campus and daily witnessing to 50 to 100 people a week in personal evangelism. And I had my student body, a lot of them wanted to go with me. I had literally, I think it was 59 students just walk with me to the campus. They wanted to go with me. And then I just talked to them we went over to the University of Central Arkansas, and I just told them what I do. And I just said, break, go. And they just started going, and they started sharing the gospel. And I was just so touched. And I remember when I left that night on the 40th night, I told my wife that I would break the fast with her, and we would go to this place called Starlight Diner. And we were going to go and break my fast with a little bit of lettuce and a cracker, because you can't eat too much. And before we went, I got down on my knees, and I kid you not, I was weeping with my wife in prayer for what God did. And you know what was crazy? I had some real hard seasons in there where I was so hungry. I mean, you go without a single bite of food for 6 weeks almost. And I went from probably 180 to 150 pounds. And knowing those seasons of hunger, but also knowing seasons where you don't feel hungry at all, you're just on a high. Well, I went to a place where I was actually weeping because I had to eat, because I had so enjoyed feasting with Jesus. And I remember thinking, I wonder if I will ever see the power of God move like I just did. And I want to say, I never have. I never have seen it. I've done a 10-day fast. I've done a 20-day fast. I've done several 3-day fasts. I have never seen the power of God show up like that. I'm not advocating go fast. I think God really, truly called me to do that for a season, and he brought about something really special. But what I did notice is that fasting brought about a special pruning. It brought about a very much of a burden for other people. It brought about a greater boldness in evangelism. It brought about a greater joy in Jesus. It brought about a greater contentment. It brought about this sense of, I'm in a relationship with God that's so powerful, and I can miss those moments. I have never experienced nothing even close to that in my life. And then I was on another 40-day fast, and I had to break it on day 20 because I have what's it called? Guillain-Barré syndrome. And Guillain-Barré syndrome, apparently you can't fast long on that. Because your body will get so so bottled up, constipated wise, that it can be toxic and dangerous. And I thought I was just going to die. And so I was like, I have to break this fast, unfortunately. And you started looking up how dangerous this was. And I'm going, man, God, you just carried me through this when I was younger. But when I tried it again, probably 15 years after that, maybe around age 40, I had to break it. But even in breaking that, I still just sensed his presence so powerfully. But I can't do those long fasts like I could. But I do believe that if our nation would pray and fast and repent and get back to trying not to make the gospel palatable, we're quit offering up a candy-coated Christianity, quit offering up a Christianity without a cross. The way up is the way down, and the way forward is through repentance. And so, yeah, it's an important topic.
Richard?
Yeah. There's a few places in the Bible where I think we really see the subject of fasting and what it looks like, what's the context and stuff. And one of them is Yom Kippur, right, the Day of Atonement. And it's interesting. I was looking at some things that Char had written about this, and it was just so interesting in Leviticus 16:29, where God says on this day they're to afflict themselves, and it's this word anah, and it means to deny or humble yourself, to deny yourself of food, drink, sustenance, and what delights, while looking to Yahweh for forgiveness, redemption, and ultimately the restoration of all things. And then looking at the life of David, it says this: David this is in the context of not his friends but his enemy. He says, "Ruthless witnesses come forward. They question me on things I know nothing about. They repay me evil for good and leave me like one bereaved. Yet when they were ill, I put on sackcloth and humbled myself," and there's that word anah again, "with fasting." And so there's something in this idea of fasting that comes with this idea of being humbled before the Lord. He says, "I bowed my head in grief as though weeping for my mother." And then here's the one that really kind of like popped for me in Isaiah 58. The Israelites are wondering, like, why isn't God hearing us? We're fasting. And God goes, well, you want to know why I'm not answering your prayers even though you're fasting? He says, here's why. While they're fasting, they were oppressing the weak, the poor, the destitute. There was this incredible hypocrisy going on. And then God says, here's my fast. It's do justice, caring for the poor, providing for the hungry. It's really quite interesting. Like, if fasting connects us to something that's broken in the world. It's an afflicting of ourselves because we feel like we're identifying with something that is broken, something that's oppressive, something that just we know grieves the heart of God, and it's grieving our hearts. And so we just kind of go, I can't eat. I just can't. I'm not going to eat, that kind of thing. So anyway, it's really, I found it really interesting and personally helpful.
So, Malachi, what do you think? And we're coming up to our break here, so.
Oh, yeah, I'll keep it short. Yeah, thank you so much, pastors, on the inside. Yeah, I've done a 3-day fast, and I've seen God work powerfully in those moments. I was homeless for a while, and once I did the 3-day fast, searched around and got moved into an apartment. And yeah, it's very powerful. It's very powerful. It's like when you fast, you enter into a spiritual, like another realm. And I think I'm looking forward to doing it again just because my flesh has been overpowering my spirit. And I want to break the bondage of sin that I've been battling with.
For sure. Well, thanks for calling us today, Malachi. It is time for us to take our break here on Pastor's Perspective. We'll be back with more of your questions in just a little bit. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube on Thursday the 19th, give us a call. The number's right there on the bottom of your screen. If you're listening on the radio on Monday the 23rd, we're not live, but we will be back live tomorrow. So give us a call then. Write down your question so you don't forget it, and then call us at 3 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. All right, break time here on Pastor's Perspective. Stand by. Hey, we're back on Pastor's Perspective. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. My name is Brian Perez. If you're listening on the radio on Monday, we're not live, so don't call us with your questions. But if you happen to be watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, Thursday, the 19th of October, give us a call. The number is right there on the bottom of your screen. And we would love to chat with you. So answering your questions today, we've got Bobby Conway, Phil Metzger, and Richard Cimino. Bobby's the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also got this great YouTube channel called Christianity Still Makes Sense. And you can subscribe to the channel and, click the little bell icon. You'll get notified every time Bobby puts up a new video. Sometimes they're, short little 60-second features. Sometimes I think they're clips of the Pastor's Perspective program because I'm watching and thinking, wait a minute, that sounds like a really familiar answer. So he's just doing a cut and paste or something. But that's cool. Thank you. Phil Metzger's here as well. He's the pastor of Calvary Chapel, San Diego, and he's joining us via Skype, and he'll be in the studio in a few weeks. Bobby will be here in a few days. Yay, yay, yay. And here in the studio with me, Richard Cimino, one of the assistant pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, sitting in for Brian Broderson. Ready for more questions, gentlemen?
Yep.
All right, then.
You bet.
Let's do this. So here's a question that was sent in on Facebook by Aurora, and it is, could you please clarify 2 John verses 10 and 11? I should have already turned to that passage so that I would have it ready to go. Here we go. 10 and 11. 2 John 10 and 11 says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house, nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. So Aurora wants clarification on this. Does this mean I should not allow my unbelieving friends into my home? Or should I continue to be hospitable to everyone? Is there an extent to when we should stop being hospitable? Richard, what do you say about this?
Well, Aurora, first of all, thanks for the question. This is not directed specifically at just any unbelieving person. It's speaking specifically about a false teacher, somebody who wants to come into your house, have an audience, and by way of your hospitality, propagate his false teaching. And in New Testament times, that was happening. They would come in and people would embrace them, and sometimes it was just unwittingly. They didn't quite maybe know the full reality of what this person was going to say or teach. But that's the way false doctrine propagated in the early church, and especially when you think a lot of churches in the New Testament were house churches, and so you just didn't invite somebody who's teaching a doctrine other. In other words, the teaching that John is talking about is the teaching that Jesus Christ is God incarnate in specific. That was the specific false teaching. So he's like, no, you don't invite that person in. This isn't about, just having common courtesy for people who you disagree with their positions. This is a person who's propagating lies concerning Jesus. So
like if a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon knocks on your door, shouldn't be the kind of thing where you invite them in, or can you invite them in, or what's the...
Well, I'm really interested to hear what Bobby and Phil have to say here, but you're not inviting, if you invited a Jehovah's Witness guy to come into your house and then you invited friends to come hear him, that's the point.
That's the problem.
It's not like saying, oh, yeah, sure, come on in, let's have a cup of coffee and let's talk. That you're not bringing that person in to spread their false doctrine. You're actually inviting them in to change their mind on their false doctrine. Mm-hmm. But it would be different if you just let somebody come in and you invited people in to hear it.
Right. Phil Metzger?
Yeah, think of it like you're welcoming their false teaching into your home and into your community versus you're welcoming somebody who needs Christ, who needs the gospel. There's a big difference here. I would say to Aurora, if you're listening or watching, I would, and maybe anybody who's listening to this, when we've, Brian, read the question to us, right? And we're all like, okay, wait, we're all, quickly scattering to get open our Bible and read those verses. And if you were doing that with us, you would maybe have felt what we felt. And it's that feeling of, oh, wait, what is this exactly talking about? So let me tell you my quick process that happened that I think Richard practiced, and I'm sure Bobby's practicing as well. And that is, I'm looking at the context. If I don't immediately understand, like, wait, what is this talking about? It's been a while since I've been in 2 John. I'm in the book of Amos right now for my own devotional, so I'm way off from 2 John. It's been a long time. So I need to refresh. Well, how do you refresh when you hear something like that? What does this mean? You want to give yourself some context. For example, 2 John's a really little book. If you just stopped and read the whole thing, we're not going to do that right now, but if you read that, Aurora, and I'm sure you have and can very easily, you get a little bit of context in there. You look back at verse 7, right before where you were asking those questions, and it says, many deceivers have gone out into the world. And it speaks to exactly what Richard just mentioned, how they didn't see Jesus as being in the flesh, coming in the flesh. And so I just want to remind everybody, when you're stumped by something that you read, give yourself the ability to go back a little bit, get yourself a little bit of context. You'd be surprised how many times the answer will be right there. Now, not every time. That's why we need pastors and thinkers and scholars and so on. But so often you can just take a little pause, go back a little bit, go to the beginning of a chapter, sometimes even a little bit before. You'd be amazed how many times you'll figure out those answers.
Especially when the Bible verse you're reading begins with, therefore. Yeah. You should go back a few verses to find out what it's there for, like they say.
Yes.
Richard.
And also, there's immediate context. There's a statement made in the context of a paragraph, in the context of a chapter, in the context of a book, and then in a context of the collection of the New Testament. And so we know that Gnosticism, from reading the New Testament, other letters, Gnosticism was a force that had to be dealt with. And so again, if you just stop and think context. That was great, Phil. Thanks.
Aurora, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. Here's another question that we got. If I'm supposed to have faith with works as a fruit thereof, then why do I so often hear that works aren't necessary as a Christian? Bobby Conway, what do you say?
We're as Augustine put it, we're not saved by faith plus works, but by faith that works. So when somebody's saying that we don't have to have works, if they're speaking properly, they're saying that we don't have to have works to be justified. But as a result of being declared righteous, that is justification, we will then produce repentance in our life that will bear fruit in sanctification. So we aren't saved by faith plus works, but we're saved by faith that works. And so fruit is evidence of our salvation. It is not the thing that determines our salvation as it relates to justification. So someone might say, are we saved by works? Well, I'd say, yeah, we're saved by works, by the works of Jesus Christ and Him alone.
Richard.
Yeah, well, in Titus chapter 2, it says, the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us, and then here it gives this list of things it trains us to do, right? To renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled. Those are efforts, by the way. Upright and godly lives in this present age, waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Check it out. Who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. Yeah,
for sure.
We need to be very careful as Christians, that we never violate the great doctrine of salvation by grace through faith alone. But we also need to remember that there's an outcome to our salvation, and good work should be a part of it.
All right. Les has a question that he sent in on our form on kwave.com, Pastor's Perspective page. You can send in your question that way as well, but it's not the best way to get an answer. You should call us when we're here live. Like today, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you've got until 5 p.m. Pacific time, Thursday. But if you're listening on the radio on Monday, well, write down your question and then call us with it tomorrow. But here's what Les wants to know. It's regarding Zechariah chapter 14, verse 21. I'll read it really quick. It says, yes, every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holiness to the Lord of hosts. Everyone who sacrifices shall come and take them and cook in them. So Les's question, what kind of sacrifices? Christ Jesus was the lamb. His sacrifice was sufficient for all sin, right? Phil, what do you say?
I say he's right. It seems, some would say that, again, it depends on how you see the end times and what that looks like, eschatologically. But there's some who would say that that sacrifice is reinstated as a reminder of what Christ has accomplished. It's not for sacrifice, but it's kind of that reminder of this is what has been accomplished for our salvation. So there's those who would hold to that, depending on how you see, last days events, you see this as just symbolic. But for those who take this in a more literal way, the most obvious would be, hey, this is like a kind of a reminder. It's like a potluck, like a giant potluck, remembering that what Jesus has accomplished for us.
Richard?
Yeah. We have a reminder, right? The bread and the cup, right? Jesus has already said it is finished, but we have this reminder with us. And I think it's pretty amazing to think that that during the millennial rule of Jesus, these sacrifices are going to be one giant reminder, because as Jesus is going to be reigning there for 1,000 years, that the one on the throne is the one. They're celebrating his death. They're celebrating the one who is the lamb that was slain. So,
Les, thank you for sending in your question using the form on the Pastor's Perspective page at kwave.com. Here's one from Chris in Los Angeles. He says, I married a woman who had been divorced, but I recently read Matthew chapter 19. Whoever marries her who is put away commits adultery. What should I do? Chris wants to know. Bobby, what do you say to Chris?
Well, it'd be a mistake to read that and think that you now need to go and, divorce your spouse. Because as, we were just talking about, the answer's in the text. If anybody marries a person, right, so they are married. So it's not that the marriage isn't recognized. It's more or less saying that if somebody enters into a marriage, and again, this is in context, like let's think of a Christian, that a Christian knowingly goes into a marriage that is not supported biblically, then it would use that adultery language in Matthew 19 that Jesus uses. And that's strong language. And I think that the point is that God, that God is wanting us to recognize that, you know what, I didn't enter into this marriage in a biblical way, but God's answer isn't to divorce your spouse then. He wouldn't say, oh, now you got to go and divorce your spouse. So now I'm going to make another wrong. And it also doesn't mean that God can't come over the top of your marriage and bless it. I think that that's something that is really important to say. Lots of us in everyday life violate scriptures. But yet God comes over the top of our life with an unbelievable grace and with an unbelievable mercy. I was born out of wedlock, for crying out loud. My dad was married to another woman. He met my mom in a bar, and I was born out of wedlock. And so God, worked in spite of that, right? And they felt a lot of guilt about that. My dad ended up divorcing his first wife. He got married as a young kid. He was throwing up sick the night before he said I do to his first wife, and my grandpa said, you don't have to go through with this. And, he felt like I need to because so much plannings went into this. And what we would always say when I taught at Family Life marriage conferences, it's a whole lot easier to break off in an engagement than it is a marriage. And my dad, he met my mom, and so, but God's blessed them. My dad got to work at a church with me for over a decade. We got to serve together. My parents, I talked to them about Jesus. They love the Lord. And so I just say to people out there, it's important to, so I think what the wrong thing would be is if my mom and dad didn't recognize that it was wrong. They need to own that it was wrong, that they didn't go about this in a biblical way. But after that repentance, they need to say, thank God for grace and for mercy, and just swim in that deep love of God and Right, and you know, because can you imagine, like, if they'd thought, oh man, well, we shouldn't have got married, and then they go get divorced. Well, then I wouldn't. Then why did my dad divorce my mom? Right. So it's kind of like there's a responsibility, and that's what I would say.
Phil Metzger, what would you add?
I love that, and I would say too, like, I think there's a case that could be made, arguably, that we've all committed every sin. Like, now, not living in every heart. Sin. There's a difference, you know. We've committed, you know. Have we committed murder through anger? Yeah. Have we committed, you know, the difference of like choosing to live in that. So I love what Bobby was sharing on that. I think it's just important that people know, like, you know, this person writing in is married, is in a, like, then let's go forward where you're at right now. Commit that marriage to Christ. Commit that relationship that you have. This is from God for you. This is it. You're in this, and God's called you into this, and trust that He's going to really, really bless that. And don't like be focused looking backwards at, oh my gosh, did we mess up? Not only did you, but you will as well. And then when you do, you own it and you repent and you move forward in that great grace that Bobby was just talking about.
Richard Zamino.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I find this quite interesting. I was looking at this before the show started. There in Matthew 19, verse 9, it's only the New King James, and I'm assuming the King James, that adds the part, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. The ESV, the CSB, the NLT, and the NIV, none of them have that. At the end of the declaration there on divorcing your wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. All those other versions, period, end of thought, full stop. It's only the New King James that carries on and says, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. So that makes it a little kind of, So,
Chris, thank you.
Can you
go
explain,
ahead, Bobby.
Richard, I think, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what he's saying, because I'm reading the ESV and it says, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, marries another, commits adultery.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it said, but then in the New King
saying?
James it adds, and whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery.
Okay.
That was the question that was really at heart there. And it's that last bit that is only, I'm imagining, it's in the AV. Because we don't see it.
You're just bringing out that distinction.
Yeah, it's not present in the other.
Yeah.
Which is, you wonder, well, what was that?
So, good news, Chris. Don't get a divorce. Don't do that. All right. Thanks for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. Here's another one that was sent in the same way from RJ. And RJ is in California. Hello, I have a question pertaining to what Jesus says in Matthew 24:36. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. RJ says, we know that Jesus is God. It's very clear in Scripture. We know that He and the Father are one, and we also know that being God, He is eternal. So if Christ is eternal, how come He is unable to know when that day is? He limited His power when He came in the flesh, yes, but before He did that, He must have been in His eternal state. So wouldn't He know when that day was? Phil Metzger, how would you answer that?
Yeah, he would know. He limited himself but He knows all things. But at that moment, in that situation, in this time, He's limited Himself. It's a willing it's a choice. In other words, it's not that He can't know, but that He's just saying here, I'm choosing in this moment to not know or to not dwell or to not be in that thing, in that moment. Matthew 24, the emphasis, of course, again, this is my second one on this. It really depends on how you see and how you filter the end times events. What you see Matthew 24 to be speaking about, it really impacts that. But I think that, I'll let Bobby get into the weeds of this more. Importantly, the transcendence of Jesus and what He knows and doesn't know. But I think there is a case to be made that He's saying that He's chosen, Philippians 2, to empty Himself in that sense. Bobby, what you got?
Well, I'll tell you, Phil, I remember having a conversation with Norman Geisler, and he kind of helped me with this. And he said to me, Bobby, when you come across some of these questions about, Jesus, as it relates to maybe his knowledge. The way to answer that is in twos. And so in his divine nature, of course he knew, because if he's all-knowing, if he didn't know, then he wouldn't be all-knowing, because to be all-knowing would mean that he knows. But in his human nature, he did, as you said, limit himself. I think that the hard thing for us to wrap our head around, and I just can't, is, well, what does that look like then? Because it would seem like there would be an overrider, okay? Like I'm going, if I got a divine nature and a human nature, I got a divine nature with the omni qualities and a human nature, it would seem like that it would override. But it didn't override as it relates to him growing in his knowledge. It says that he grew in his knowledge, but then it says that he also knew all things about humans, right? You think about, like, his sustenance. It would seem like the divine nature could override his need for sustenance, but he still had a need for sustenance. He still got tired. He still slept. So there was a way in which his human nature was shut off from what his divine nature knew. And how that interacted is where it gets very mysterious. And I'm content, honestly. I'm going, I guess if I was God, I would be able to figure out that. But I don't know that. But I find it freeing to just say, he had two natures. And so in his human nature, he limited himself. He didn't know. But in his divine nature, of course he knew. The same way, like when we talk about like the death of Jesus, it'd be wrong to say that it was deicide that was committed, right? Like God didn't die. God can't die. God's, ever existing. His human nature was what laid down, right? His divine nature was swirling around. You can read about what he was up to, different things were going on. So all that to say, it's very complex, but I'm okay with the tension.
RJ, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook. Let's do one more that was sent in that way. Tina, can you explain the difference between deliverance and exorcism? Phil Metzger, how would you answer that?
Deliverance and exorcism. Yeah, yes. Sure. In 2.5 minutes, I got you. Okay, let me start with and I'll let the other guys jump in. I don't want to take the whole time, but some of this has to do with kind of your church background and where you go to church and how you understand terminology and semantics, whether deliverance is exorcism. Okay, so the idea of exorcism is the idea of the casting out of a demon from within a person. Deliverance maybe, and again, I'm just going to use my own concepts here. In deliverance, I could maybe not be demon possessed, but I am influenced demonically. My mind, I've been led down certain wrong pathways of thinking, and I'm praying for God to deliver me from that demonic idea, that demonic thought. And I would say exorcism is the presence of a demonic being inside of a person.
Bobby Conway?
Yeah. So maybe it sounds like what, Phil, I hear you saying is that maybe all exorcism entails deliverance, but not all deliverance entails exorcism.
That's that. You know what? See, he said it way better, way faster. Much better.
There it is. Oh. And now you know the end of the story.
It sounds like Richard has nothing else to add to
that. Richard, he can fill something in. Come on, Richard, what you got?
No, that was full stop.
All right, very good. One more from Facebook. Richard, we'll give you this one. Luella wants to know about cremation. Is it wrong to be cremated? I'm wondering because when the rapture happens, God will call the bodies out of the grave. So what happens to believers that were cremated?
Well, depending on how long they've been in the grave, all those bodies ended up looking like the cremated stuff. So,
right.
I think cremation is just...
That's true.
So you can spend less money.
That's full stop, huh?
There you go. I'm done.
These are mic drops today, buddy.
Yes.
Come on, baby. Bring it.
Yeah, bring it. Let's go.
There you go. Luella, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
You got to give Phil a mic drop now.
Yeah, no, I don't have one. I was just going to say, it's like, I've people saying this a lot recently, especially recently. It's interesting how, like, I don't think you're allowed to cremate and so on and so forth. And like Richard just said, that's where all of our bodies are going. One, and just remember, when the Bible says that, they didn't have cremation at the time. So they wouldn't have even had the concept. They just knew bodies were put in there. They didn't think about it in any different way. That's a cultural thing. Cremation is speeding up the very process it took 100 years to do.
All right, Luella, thank you for sending in your question from Hemet, California. And we are out of time on today's program. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for following. Thank you for clicking bells on YouTube for our channel, as well as Bobby's Christianity Still Makes Sense channel. We're out of time. We'll talk to you tomorrow. For Bobby Conway, Phil Metzger, and Richard Cimino, I'm Brian Perez. And Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.